are listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson, episode 29. Hey there, you're listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast. My name is Angela Henderson, and on this show, we talk about improving your business, life, or both by having amazing and rich conversations with brilliant guests who will inspire you and who will give you tips and tricks to help you grow both in life and in business. Hey there, and welcome back to Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson, and I'm your host, obviously Angela, from Angela Henderson Consulting, and I'm so thrilled that you are tuning in today. On today's podcast, I'm excited to have David Chambat, the founder and CEO of Villa Finder, who's going to be talking with us today about how to bootstrap a startup. What are the benefits of bootstrapping? What have been the biggest mistakes either himself or others have made with bootstrapping? And what are his top 5 tips on how to bootstrap a startup correctly? So welcome to the show, David.
Yeah, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? So now, where are you? Now, I know you're from France, but where are you currently based?
So I'm based in Singapore. I've been living in Singapore now for 12 years, and that's where we started our business from.
Dude, fantastic. I was just in Singapore for a short layover on my way to the Maldives last week. It's a phenomenal airport, Singapore is.
Yeah, it's been voted the best airport in the world for many years now. I think it's winning all the possible awards. It's a beautiful and very comfortable airport.
Gosh, I mean, I was in, there was a sunflower garden, there were cinemas, there was massages, you could rent a bed space for a short amount of time. And the food was brilliant. So gosh, if you're ever going to get stuck in an airport, I would say Singapore is the airport you want to get stuck in.
Yeah, definitely.
So now, as I was just talking to you prior to us starting the recording for this podcast, it's a very, very small world because my first business, which is still going, Finley and Me, I actually have been working with one of your employees named Lucy Evans from Bali Villas, which is an arm of your overarching, Villa Finder branch. So I always have to giggle when the world connects us with people because it truly is a small world.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. It's a very small world. And I think there's a very strong link between Australia and Bali. And most of our business is still in Bali now. So I guess we have a lot of, touch points down there in Australia.
Gosh, absolutely. As Australians, especially when we travel with small families, we find we want to go places that aren't like going back to my homeland, Canada, or traveling to the US where it's 14 or 16 hours. Again, Bali is just 5.5 hours from Brisbane. It's if your kid's going to scream, it's only a short, plane ride that you have to deal with it. So Bali is definitely a tourist destination for many of us local Australians.
No, for sure. We see you guys a lot in Bali, in the streets of Bali. That's a great destination.
Yes, and I totally agree. So now, before we jump into everything about bootstrapping, I'd love for the audience to get to know you a little bit better because you have a very amazing and juicy history as I was researching you prior to this podcast. And so would you mind telling us a little bit more about Villa Finder, a little bit about your history? And since obviously you've traveled extensively in your life, I'm dying to know your favorite holiday destination.
Well, I've basically always worked in tourism. I started my career in an airline. I worked a few years for Air France and then for KLM when Air France and KLM merged back in 2004. And from there, I moved into the hotel world where I worked for a hotel video solution called tvtrip.com. So I did that for another 4 or 5 years. And then I left this company to start my own business, which was at that time villavalley.com, that became later on villafinder.com. So the way how does this start? Actually, funny enough, I almost bought a villa in Bali. That was back in 2012, 6 years ago. And then so I saved some money to buy this house. And then in the process of buying it, I was researching how I could rent it in the future. And then at that time, again, 6 years ago, there was no Airbnb, there was no HomeAway or a very small HomeAway at that time. So as I realized there wasn't much happening on this space. So instead of buying the house, I just invested into a domain name and a few interns at that time just to start this business and get it going. And then that became successful very fast. So then we properly started it with a real team and etc.
Josh, well, how fun is that though? And so again, you were going to do one thing and then you decided to put the money into a URL, domain name, and here you are today.
Yeah. This is really about, when I think it all comes down to a timing. I think the way, I mean, the main factor of success for a business is very often being at the right place at the right time. And I guess we would have, I wouldn't have started this business 2 or 3 years ago. Now the market has totally changed, and it's a much more difficult market to enter, especially as we'll discuss later, if you want to bootstrap a business, meaning starting a business without too much money, that would be impossible now. But 5, 6 years ago, that was possible. So yeah, so it's all about timing and really, starting it right when the timing is right.
And I agree. Yeah, there's the timing and is a huge element. And I also think knowing the market, because before, as I was saying, I was doing some research for this podcast, and I found there was a survey done with 316 business owners, and they listed the 5 key reasons why entrepreneurs aren't executing their business ideas. And funnily enough, at the top of that, 41.2% of those that were surveyed said knowledge. They just didn't have the knowledge base. Directly after that was 32.3% said that it was funding. And below that, one of the other top 3 was around being in there at the right space, which is, funny you bring that up, because it's a great segment into what we're going to talk about today. And that is really your topic about how to bootstrap a startup. So tell me, because not a lot of people in the audience might not have ever heard the term bootstrapping, or they may have heard it, but for the purposes of this particular podcast, I'd love for you to give us your definition of what is bootstrapping.
So in business terms, basically bootstrapping is, means starting a business from scratch without any external help. So basically any external finance. So the short answer is bootstrapping means, you finance the business yourself. So, that in general, of course, if you want to start a business, there's a few different ways to finance it. Huh? You can either finance it with your customers, which is usually what you do when you bootstrap. You can obviously raise money from investor. You can raise some debt at bank. You can raise money from friends and family, or you can take from your own savings. So really, bootstrapping is that solution where you take from your own savings when you take money from your customers, obviously, and so you start without any external help. So that's the short answer. I guess the broader answer is really about that bootstrapping is a mindset. So it's really about, starting a business, thinking, with every action, especially at the beginning, being, a lot of thoughts before you buy anything, before you hire anyone. So it's really a discipline, which you actually embed into the business and into the startup culture as well. And funnily enough, again, with the bootstrapping, some additional research I found is that collectively 80% of startups are actually funded through personal funds, credit, family, or friends. And in the US, through the Small Business Administration, they released data stating that the number of startups that initiated was basically, again, as we said, 80% was through personal savings, credit, which then was followed by family and friends, then venture capital, angel investors, bank, and last was crowdfunding. But to think that 80% of startups are funded through their own personal funds is quite a big number. Would you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts about that? Yeah, that's what we see a lot. I see that a lot in Singapore, actually. So here in Singapore, there's a growing ecosystem of startups. So we have more and more startups, whether they are small or not that small anymore. But and a lot of the startups are actually bootstrapped. So, and actually, I would even argue that most of the startups who end up getting venture capital money usually started bootstrapping. Because if you look at the Airbnb story, for instance, the founders of Airbnb for their first 12 months or 24 months, they were purely bootstrapping, and they were selling their cereal blogs before they actually went into raising money and properly started Airbnb. So I think there's a lot of also, again, the mindset. So even if you raise VC money at the end of the day, or after 1 or 2 years, I think you can still be considered as a bootstrap company in many ways. So.
And do you, in your own experience, and then obviously living in Singapore for the last 12 years and seeing an enormous amount of growth from the entrepreneur space, what do you think are the benefits of bootstrapping?
Well, I think the first benefit, maybe the most important one, is that you have to be customer focused. So if you're bootstrapping, you have again, you're not getting any other money than the money you can get from your sales, from your customers. So you and like, if I think back, 6 years ago when we started the business, I was answering all the customer calls and all the customer bookings myself. I didn't have a team. So I think, so the company, and myself was totally customer focused. And I think that's a big benefit, as opposed to if you're raising money, then you're going to spend more time maybe seeing investors and presenting a business case and, going to conference, etc. I think that's a wider benefit. I think on top of it, obviously, because you're not hunting for investment, you would spend more time focusing on your business, focusing on how to deliver a better product, how to, reach out to more customers, etc. And then, of course, like I said before, I think it's also a mindset in terms of financial discipline. And I think that's also when you don't have the money, basically you can't spend it, obviously. So it comes, to financial discipline, the way you pay your suppliers, the way you will hire, etc. And so that gives you a discipline, which actually you keep. Interestingly enough, I mean, we've been profitable now for more than 5 years, but we kept that discipline of, not over hiring or over spending money. And I think, and I think that's in our genes. And if I compare myself to other companies that I made in Singapore that have raised capital, I think if on the opposite, you've taken the mindset or the habit of overspending, it's extremely hard to step back. I mean, if you've taken a very nice and very beautiful office from day one, and if you have a CFO and you have a HR manager and you have, all sort of support people in the company, it's very hard to, get rid of all that overhead later on in the process.
So really, ultimately, what you're saying is with bootstrapping, you're just, I guess, again, the mindset is there, but in addition to that is that there's a lot of work, like it's kind of like you're so hands-on, and so you really quite are so in tuned, and because you've had to go through the processes and the procedures and the ups and downs yourself from a hands-on versus have already outsourced, by the time you get to an element when you are able to outsource, would you agree that you probably have just such a sound and better understanding of how your business works, opposed to potentially people who might get venture capital, et cetera, and jump right in and start outsourcing before they've actually been in the trenches?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a better view of the business. I think there's also a lot of benefits of having external investors, but and for sure you will get other feedbacks, and you will also have a very intimate view of your business. But what is for sure, when you bootstrap, you really have to be on the ground. Mm-hmm. So if I take my personal example, when we started Villa Bali at that time, we the first 50 villas or let's say even the first 100 villas on the website, I personally inspected and signed them all myself. So I was on my scooter in the streets of Seminyak and Canggu, visiting each and every villa for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and signing those first 50 or 60 villas that we needed to launch the website. And because I knew all the owners and I knew all their prices and all the terms and conditions, and I got to know that business inside out. And I think and even though I don't do that, maybe I don't do that very much these days anymore. I mean, I still have this intimate knowledge of how a property owner, works and how he thinks of villa agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is extremely precious.
And because of that experience, though, what have you seen in yourself or with others is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to bootstrapping?
Well, I think a mistake that actually we made maybe a little bit later in the process, I would say after 2 or 3 years, is that because of that financial discipline, there can be a tendency of under-investing. Okay. So I mentioned before those VC-funded companies that maybe over-invest or have unnecessary overhead costs. But again, as a bootstrap company, you might have the tendency to under-invest. So maybe not hiring, like for instance, in our case, I mean, because I also like numbers, I did the accounting for the first, I don't know, maybe 2.5 years.
Sure.
And I think I was too long. I should have taken maybe an accountant on board, a year before or 18 months before, and spend maybe more time signing new destinations or signing more villas, etc. So I think there's that risk of under-investing and doing all the things by yourself, which can actually, either you can end up burning yourself out, or you can just, damage the company business. Yep. So that's one drawback. I see another drawback actually, which now I think about it, is that you might end up, and I think it would be a lot of your listeners, it can be a bit lonely at the top. So I guess if you're not if you're doing the things all by yourself or with a very small team, and you don't have any investor, you don't have any mentor, etc., it could be a bit hard at the top. So you could be a bit alone, and it could be also difficult to get feedback from people outside the business. So I think it's also important when you bootstrap to maybe set up kind of a small committee, or maybe not a board, a proper board, but at least a committee, or you can organize feedbacks from people from outside the company as well.
Yep, and I do see that often, whether or not it's bootstrapping, do you know what I mean, angel investors, et cetera, is that sometimes, again, that loneliness, especially people who have come from corporate, and you've been in corporate for so long, and you can, do you know what I mean, have your lunch breaks, and you're surrounded by people, and there's always people to talk to, and the next thing you know, you're like talking to yourself. And you're like, oh, okay, well, there's a computer and myself. And that, again, sometimes it can be hard for people to ask for that help too, because they're like, oh, if I'm seen as being asking for help, then maybe they don't think I'm successful, or they don't think I know what I'm doing. So often I get a lot of people that I work with that I'm like, no, dude, it's okay. Ask for help. If you're asking for help, you're probably helping other people who might not be, do you know what I mean, confident enough to ask for help, you know, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a strong thing to surround yourself with people who can help you grow.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another side of it is that if you bootstrap and if you don't equip yourself with enough people, etc., you would also end up multitasking all the time. So doing 10 things at a time, all day long, all week long, all month long, all year long. And it can also be, it can be extremely difficult and even dangerous from a health perspective. And I think that's and of course not everyone can also multitask. I mean, there's some people who don't like, I don't know, numbers, who don't like the HR part of the business, etc. So you also, again, need to find the right balance.
And I think, and again, you touched upon there is that, like, for example, I'm not an accountant. I had to outsource very early on because that's just not my zone of genius. And so again, I think it's about identifying when you do decide to bootstrap or not bootstrap, be able to grow your businesses. Look at what are your strengths? What are you really good at? And what do you hate doing, or what are you just not your skill set? And outsource accordingly. And it's also important don't be afraid to start out small. You might not hire an accountant full time. You might hire them as a contract basis, and you grow as your business grows. Because I do see, I think what you said earlier is people will start employing all these people, but they don't have the money, to pay for full-time wages. So, again, hire people as you need it. Start as contract. They don't have to be employees right off the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to give you an example, so we started our business out of Singapore, and then we again started the business with villas only in Bali, and then we did extend to Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius later on in the process. But when we started Bali, we didn't have a local office in Bali, and most of our property owners were asking us, so where's your office? That'll be great, blah, blah, blah. So what we did, instead of putting a proper office with a proper team, we just hired, a couple of contractors, so a couple of freelancers, a German guy and his Indonesian girlfriend, and who were acting as our, local reps. And then again, that was we were paying them by the time they were using. And so that did cost us the fraction of one salary, instead again of giving us all the headache and all the cost of a proper office. And then down the road, after a year and a half, when we had sufficient business, then we started a proper office, a proper company in Indonesia, and now we have 25 people there. But again, it's a process, and it's very early. And I always say it's always better you really need to have the customers first. And once you have the customers and revenue, then have the structure to actually take care of it. But worry about your customers first.
And I also think that so often so many people are like, oh, they don't want to get their hands dirty, or they don't want to. But sometimes, again, it comes down to, I'm not a huge fan of the word hustle. I think you have to work hard. I don't think you have to hustle. But again, it's one of those things that sometimes people want to jump a few steps, and they want to go straight from opening a business to like having that team. But sometimes you have to go through that process. And sometimes you got to do things that you might not be good at, or things you don't want to. But as soon as you can, I think it's important to understand that there's a process when we start up a business.
For sure. That's a very steep learning curve. So that's a learning curve, and you have to learn inside out from the customers, from the suppliers. So in our case, we have customers going into the villas, and we have suppliers who are our villa owners. So we have those two, main phenomena that we have to understand to run this business. And I think you can't succeed if you don't go through that learning curve. So even though I was in the tourism business before, and I did work with hotels before, I guess, again, a individual property owner based in Bali who's got a villa or 2 villas or 3 villas has totally different reactions from a hotel manager in Singapore or in Hong Kong. So so you need to sit down with them, you need to spend time with them. And so there's this learning curve. And especially, I guess, in the first, there's always those 2 critical years, right? The first 2 years where you have to build a product, talk to your first customers, get your first sales, your first bookings. In our case, get the first customers into the villas, get their feedback, get the feedback from the villa owners, from the people working in the villas, etc., to really understand how it works and to be able to scale the business. But then, so those first 2 years where you understand the product are really crucial.
And so often I also see people, one of the things they want to outsource right off the bat is selling. And I strongly stand by this, that I believe that in order for your business to be successful, you have to be the person selling on the ground for at least the first 6 to 12 months. You have to understand your customer. You have to understand your product. You have to understand how to execute and finish that sale, how to start the sale. And so often also people go, oh, but I don't like selling. But I'm like, you have to know how to sell your own product. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, usually I would argue that if you start a business, you must be loving your product, right? I'm sure you do love your podcast and your blog, and we love our villas. I think it's if you start an ice cream business, I guess you would love ice cream, right? So I guess if you love your product, there's no reason you wouldn't go out and sell it. And even if you think you're not a salesperson, I think I would think that if you like your product, you're certainly a better salesperson than you think, for sure.
Exactly right. So tell me, do you think bootstrapping's for everyone?
I mean, like you said before, right? You said 80% of companies are bootstrapped. So I think a lot of companies can bootstrap. Of course, there's a few exceptions. I think the number one big exception, if your business requires a big capital investment, right? If you're starting the next spaceship company, right? You would need a factory and all this. So obviously you would need a little bit of capital investment. So anything that requires capital investment, whether even a restaurant, right? I mean, if you start a restaurant, if you want a proper professional kitchen, it would maybe cost you $200,000 or $300,000. You would need capital investment. So there's a few businesses where you really need capital investment. There's another type of business, which is actually the company I was working for before tvtrip.com, where we were in a B2B space, right? We were selling hotel videos to hotelier, and then we were making money out of the broadcast of those videos onto booking.com or HRS, etc. And so in those kind of B2B businesses where the sales cycles are long and where you usually get paid once a product is actually completed, it's also a little bit more challenging to purely bootstrap. Because again, at TV Trip, there was a long time before we could convince a hotel to join us, and before the video would actually go live, that would maybe be 6 to 9 months. So you need to build up a whole team and a whole product phase before you can actually get revenue. So in those businesses that are by essence negative in cash flows, you would also need to find a way to actually bridge finances.
And speaking of, again, just about should people bootstrap or not, I also think it's important that there's a big push in the entrepreneur world or small business world or just business world talking about quit your 9 to 5, just jump right in head first. And I disagree with that to an extent, because I think if you're going to bootstrap it and you just got a new baby or you've just bought a new house or your honeymooners or whatever, there can be an enormous amount of pressure on the family dynamic just starting a business and then starting a business, bootstrapping it, there are things, marital breakdown, people, bankruptcy. I mean, there's a whole list of things that can go bad, when you are bootstrapping. So again, I always say, don't just necessarily jump from the 9 to 5 unless you've got a little bit of a buffer zone, unless your partner really understands. Because, for the longest time with Finley and me, I worked as a mental health clinician for my entire time. So I worked, 8-hour days, ran that first business, started this business. And some people thought I was a little bit crazy, but at the end of the day, I had 4 weeks annual leave off. I had 2 weeks holidays, or 2 weeks sick leave. I then bought 4 weeks of purchase leave. I also had 1 roster day off a month. I also had 13 public holidays. So out of that year, I was actually only at work for 7 months and 1 week, I think. So I was still able to grow my business at the same time without putting that additional stressor. Even though we bootstrapped it, I didn't have that additional stress because I was able to, still have money coming in at the beginning when it was slow, because it was an e-commerce platform. So, just be mindful of that if you're out there listening, thinking about starting a business and how you're going to bootstrap it. Don't necessarily just jump from the 9 to 5.
Yeah, for sure. And I think these days also it's getting really much, more and more affordable to actually start a business. Now access to technology is extremely affordable. I mean, so I started working in the internet industry about 10 years ago with tvtrip.com. And at that time, when you wanted to, start a proper website and, in our case, displaying videos and stuff, we did need 4 or 5 developers full time for 6 months, whatever. So the cost of starting this business was maybe $500,000 in any case. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess with all the platforms that are easily available, like WordPress and a lot of them, you can really start something. You can learn online. You can do an online course, learn how to use a simple CMS system just to start a website. You can start, you can start on Instagram. You can start on Facebook. I mean, there's a lot of small businesses that you can start from home at very, very low cost.
And that's the thing is, you don't have to. There's so many resources on YouTube. There's an enormous amount of accessible knowledge business-wise where, like you said, 10, 15 years ago, we were pretty much, the internet wasn't as where it is now. We were having to just, live and learn, I guess, make mistakes, move on. Whereas now there's quite solid, foundational information out there to help businesses.
Yes, there's a lot of information online. And I think what's interesting as well is that there's also a lot of communities in the real life. I said in Singapore a lot. I don't know. I'm sure it's the same in Brisbane or in Sydney or in the major cities in Australia. There's a lot of, founders meetups, entrepreneurs meetups. So we have a lot of this here in Singapore, around technology, around tourism, around, different things. And so it's also easy to meet people and share your concern, share your problems. And we have lots of workshops here about, how to finance a company, how to be a better salesperson, et cetera, et cetera. So it's easy to get all this. And I guess there's a lot of ecosystems that want to promote entrepreneurship. So Singapore is a big one. So Singapore does invest a lot of money in actually promoting entrepreneurship. There's a lot of accessible, again, workshops, seminars, conferences that are free of charge that you can attend. So I'm sure if you check in your city, you can find network groups as well in the real life. And I think it's important to also look for groups in the real life because, like I said before, you can get a little bit lonely, especially if you do 100% digital business. And if you're staying home, I think it's great if you go out there, meet other people and share.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a huge connector. I'm a huge person to person or human to human, whatever term you want to use. And I think the only reason why my business has grown as quickly as it has and as successful as it is because of my connections and willingness to network with people. You never want to be the smartest person in a room. You want to put yourself in those situations like you're talking about in Singapore with the different groups they have. We've got them here in Brisbane. Continue to, push yourself, go into uncomfortable situations. But the amount of support you'll have and wealth and knowledge you'll get from those communities is hands down, one of the best things you can do.
For sure.
And tell me, what would you say for those listeners out there right now who are thinking about having a business or they're currently in this kind of process where they are bootstrapping, but they're like, oh, do I need investment? What are your, give us a couple tips when it comes to how to bootstrap a startup? What do they need to, really consider?
Well, I think, first of all, like I said before, be the first salesman or saleswoman of your company. I think that's the most important, like you said before as well. I think it's the most important angle. You need to listen to customers. You need to talk to customers. You need to sit down with them, understand their problems, understand why they need your product, and how much money they're willing to spend, what sort of this service they're actually expecting, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the number one tip that I can give. I think later on in the process as well, my second tip would be that you have to embed bootstrapping into the company culture. It's nice to start bootstrapping. It's maybe a little bit harder even to keep that discipline and to keep that company culture. So that's what we do very much at Villa Finder. The people we recruit, we really trying to assess that mindset, that attitude. So in all our interviews, we're looking for people that have that commitment, that focus on the product, that focus on the customer. And I think now, after 6 years, it's really embedded into our company culture. And I think it's very important to try to, again, extend that to your whole team and to your whole company as you grow. And maybe last one. Another tip is that you really have to focus on finding a niche. You can't bootstrap a company if you go too wide. Like in our case, right? We are doing very well in a very competitive market. There's plenty of great companies out there, including Airbnb, HomeAway, What If in Australia. But we're doing very well. And the only reason why we're doing very well is that we are in a niche. We're providing a service that no one else does provide, which is a real customer service, a real concierge service in the villas. And customers are ready, to I would say, take the risk to make a booking with us because of that service, instead of just booking with Airbnb or with What If. And I think so. We wouldn't be able to compete head to head against Airbnb. It's impossible. So, and I think the tip is really to, again, find your niche. Don't try to, go against the very big boys and girls. Just find a niche.
And I think, again, there's a saying I talk about, is like owning your own race course. Don't worry so much about what other people are doing. Just focus on yours. And like you said, I could talk for hours about the importance of niching. I could do a little rant, but I'll save that for today. But yeah, it is important. You can't be the generalist. You can't be everything to everyone. So you've done a fantastic job with really honing in on that. You're going to be the best place for people in the, Asian Pacific, correct me if I'm wrong, to be able to go and find a particular villa that's going to be, high end. It's going to meet the needs of those families, newlyweds, couples, etc. Versus you're not trying to be a hotel. You're not trying to be a resort. You're trying to be the, exclusive villa finder. And that, again, is why, like you said, you guys are doing so well. You found a niche and you have executed it beautifully.
Yeah, thank you.
So listen, for those listeners that are out there, how can they connect with you, or where can they find you if they want to learn more about you or about Villa Finder?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, and you can just search for Villa Finder online, and then you'll find our website. You can send us a chat or a message, and I'll be very happy to get back to you.
Gosh, well, thank you so much, David, for joining me today here in obviously Brisbane and you in Singapore. I appreciate your wealth of knowledge about how to bootstrap a startup, and I wish you a beautiful day over in Singapore.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you. And for the rest of you, my team and I will also be putting together the whole transcription for this episode at angelahenderson.com.au. And of course, I cover all sorts of related business and life topics inside my Facebook group, the Australian Business Collaborative, of over, we're almost hitting 4,000 business owners. So make sure to join the community. I love connecting with you guys, and I look forward to seeing you soon. But until then, have an awesome day, no matter where you are in the world. And yes, I look forward to you tuning into my next episode on the Business and Life Conversations podcast with me, Angela Henderson. Have a great day, everyone. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson. www.angelahenderson.com.au